Even when Napoleon was burning Europe, reshaping borders, even when Germany plunged the world into the darkness of the Second World War, even in the most soul-chilling moments of the Cold War, when Kennedy and Khrushchev held their fingers on the red buttons and the world froze in anticipation of a nuclear mushroom cloud, central bankers continued to observe their professional etiquette. There existed a seemingly indestructible rule carved in the granite of financial ethics. Sovereign reserves are the property of a nation, not of a specific regime. You can freeze them, deprive the enemy of access to them, use them as a hostage in negotiations, or prohibit transactions, but you never, under any circumstances, rewrite the right of ownership to yourself. Why was this a taboo that even the most brutal dictators and the most cynical democracies feared to break? Because bankers, unlike politicians, understand the deep nature of money. They know that money is not paper with portraits of presidents or numbers in a bank application. Money is crystallized trust. At the moment when you steal the reserves of a nuclear superpower, you do not simply take the money, you blow up the foundation upon which the entire architecture of global finance stands. You say to the whole world, your accumulation is a fiction. Your right of ownership is an illusion that exists only as long as you are liked by Washington. At the moment you cease to satisfy us, your money becomes ours. And so in our simulation, the signature is set, the ink has dried. Flash news streaks across Bloomberg and Reuters terminals, causing shock from Tokyo to London, forcing traders to spill their coffee and frantically call their clients. But the main question now is not what the USA did. That is already a fait accompli in our model. The main question on which the fate of your savings depends is how Moscow will respond. It is naive, even criminally naive, to believe that the Kremlin will simply shake the air with angry statements in the UN Security Council or write offended posts on social networks. The time for diplomatic bows and expressions of concern has passed. The response will be cold, calculated, asymmetrical, and what is most terrifying, prepared and rehearsed in advance. It will be an ultimatum, a harsh time lag, say 48 hours, an ultimatum that leaves no room for maneuver, gives no time for endless consultations in Brussels, and effectively presses a cocked trigger to the temple of the Western banking system, Vladimir Putin, or that collective mind of the Security Council that will make the decision in Russia, is not bluffing in this scenario. Markets possessing a beast-like instinct for real catastrophes will instantly catch this scent, the scent of an existential threat, the scent of a war being waged not with missiles, but with promissory notes. The essence of the message will be crystal clear to anyone who knows how to read between the lines. If you destroy the legal foundations for our state money, we destroy the legal foundations for your private money. If the funds are not unfrozen before the timer expires, Russia launches a cascading seizure of assets and financial countermeasures capable of causing a liquidity crisis compared to which the Great Depression of 1929 will seem like a slight malaise, and the 2008 crisis, an insignificant correction. Let us now, with surgical precision, layer by layer, analyze exactly what happened, because the devil lies in the details about which the evening news remains silent and which do not fit into short clips on TikTok. Mainstream media will call this an act of restoring justice, a reparation mechanism, a law on the protection of democracy, or any other euphonic term intended to calm the public. But if we discard the propaganda husk and look at the situation through the eyes of an impartial lawyer or macroeconomist, we face an act of technical default. This word is frightening, but it must be pronounced loudly and clearly. Russian reserves are not suitcases of cash hidden in a basement. They are promissory notes, U.S. Treasury bonds, treasuries, German bonds, Bunds, French bonds, OATs. When the issuer of a debt in this case, the government of the USA and the countries of the European Union, declares that it refuses to fulfill its obligations to a specific legal holder, that is a default. Your moral justification has absolutely no significance. It does not matter whether you consider the debt holder a villain, an aggressor, or a hero. The financial market is a cynical place. It does not operate with categories of good and evil. It operates with categories of risk, yield, and contract reliability. A bond is a contract. If one side tears up the contract unilaterally, the value of this contract, its sacred essence, tends towards zero. The American administration, in our scenario, is betting on the fact that the dollar is not just a currency, but an irreplaceable operating system of the planet, like Windows or air. And the world will simply have no choice but to swallow this violation of the rules and continue playing the old way. This is a classic mistake of an empire in decline. The belief that your power stems from your exclusivity and not from trust in your institutions. Inside the White House and the Treasury building, in these hours, chaos will reign, hidden behind massive oak doors. Professional economists, employees of the Federal Reserve System, and career officials of the Ministry of Finance who have dedicated their lives to studying markets are in a state of quiet panic. They understand what populist politicians refuse to see. The world financial system is a system of communicating vessels. One cannot simply erase 300 billion from the balance sheet without causing a tsunami on the other side of the ocean. The main part of this money, about 200 billion, does not lie in America. It is located in Europe, in the Euroclear depository located in Belgium. Euroclear is not just a bank. It is a systemically significant node of the world economy, a kind of accounting office for the entire planet through which transactions worth trillions of euros pass daily. By making the decision on confiscation, Washington effectively twists the arms of its European partners, forcing them into economic suicide. Belgium, Germany, France, these are legal states where the protection of private property is inscribed in the DNA of the constitutional order. To seize this money, Europeans will have to rewrite their laws retroactively, trample their own constitutional norms, and destroy the reputation of the euro as a safe haven that they built for decades. Putin, in our scenario, understands this perfectly. His blow is calculated to split transatlantic unity. He is essentially saying to Europe, the Americans are solving their political problems at your expense. They want to be heroes on a white horse, but you, your banks, your currency, your industry, and your pensioners will have to pay for this banquet. Now let us move to the most terrifying part, to the mechanics of retribution. What exactly can Russia do besides loud words? In Moscow's arsenal, there is financial nuclear weaponry that the West prefers not to think about or to downplay. These are the so-called Type C accounts. To a layman, this name sounds like a boring accounting term that does not portend trouble, but in reality, it is a trap into which hundreds of billions of dollars of Western capital have fallen since 2022, when the West froze Russian reserves. Russia, in response, did not begin to confiscate assets. It blocked them. Profits from factories, dividends from shares, loan payments, income from the sale of assets, lease payments for aircraft, all these gigantic flows of money did not go abroad. They accumulated in special ruble accounts locked inside the Russian financial system like a genie in a bottle. There lies the money of the world's largest investment funds, BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, the pension funds of California, Norway. There lie the incomes of energy giants, BP, Shell, Exxon, the profits of consumer goods manufacturers, auto concerns, and banks are frozen there. The total volume of these funds, according to various expert estimates, is quite comparable to those same 300 billion and possibly exceeds them If physical assets of factories and infrastructure are taken into account, the Kremlin's ultimatum in our simulation activates a simple, harsh mirror principle: an eye for an eye. You nationalize our state reserves. We nationalize the private funds of your corporations from Type C accounts. Imagine the Monday morning after the expiration of the ultimatum. General directors of the world's largest companies wake up, open their terminals, and learn that their Russian assets, which they still counted on their balance sheets hoping for a future settlement of the conflict, are now officially equal to zero, not transferred to the property of the Russian state or sold for 1 ruble. This is not just a paper loss that can be hidden in the footnotes of an annual report. This is a gigantic hole in capital. For the banking sector, this is an absolute catastrophe. If a large European systemic bank loses, say, 20 or 30 billion dollars of real assets, this can instantly collapse its capital adequacy below the regulatory minimum established by the Basel agreements. What happens next? Margin calls. The demand for immediate coverage of losses. The bank begins to feverishly sell off other healthy assets, gold, Apple shares, bonds, to close the hole, causing a collapse in completely different markets that seemingly have no relation to Russia. Shares of the banking sector fly into the abyss, losing from 30 to 40% of their value in a single trading session. Depositors, seeing headlines about nationalization and holes in balance sheets, succumb to panic and run to withdraw cash. A classic bank run begins, as it was with Silicon Valley Bank, only on the scale of a continent. And the most terrifying thing is that neither the ECB nor the Fed will be able to stop this simply by printing money, because the crisis is caused not by a lack of liquidity. There is plenty of money in the system, but by the total loss of faith in the solvency of the system. But corporate collapse and banking panic are only the first circle of hell. The real threat, the one that turns the hair of Fed Chairman Jerome Powell white and keeps G7 finance ministers awake at night, is hidden in the government bond market. The U.S. debt is the foundation of foundations. It is the $34 trillion upon which, as on a base, the world economy stands. U.S. Treasury bonds, treasuries, are considered a risk-free asset. They are used as collateral in millions of transactions every day. Banks lend money to each other against the security of these bonds. Pension funds keep the savings of future generations in them. If trust in these papers is shaken, the entire banking system will stall like an engine into which sand has been poured. In our simulation, after the announcement of the confiscation, the largest holders of American debt, China, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, find themselves before an existential choice. Put yourself in the place of Xi Jinping. You have nearly $800 billion in American papers in your reserves. You see how the USA confiscates Russia's money. You understand that Taiwan is the next hotspot, and a conflict there is a matter of time. Your question is obvious. If I do not withdraw my money now, will I ever see it again, or will it also become reparations? The market begins to price a political risk premium into the cost of American debt. Even if China does not begin to dump bonds massively, which would collapse its own reserves as well, it will simply stop buying new debt issues. And who then will buy the American debt? The USA has a budget deficit of nearly $2 trillion a year. They need to borrow money every day to pay the salaries of soldiers, doctors, teachers, and to pay out social benefits. If foreign investors leave the auctions, the yield on bonds soars and rates rise. And we are not talking about a rise from 4% to 5%, which is already considered a problem. In conditions of panic and a boycott by the global South, rates could fly to 10%, 12%, 15%. What is a 12% rate on U.S. government debt? It is the mathematical end of the American economy in its current form. Firstly, it is the inevitable collapse of the real estate market. Mortgages will become inaccessible to anyone except millionaires. House prices will collapse, burying the savings of the middle class, for whom a house is the main asset. Secondly, it is a wave of bankruptcies of zombie companies. About 20% of American corporations can exist and service their debts only at low rates. At high rates, they are bankrupt. These are millions of fired people, a rise in unemployment, and a social explosion. Thirdly, it is the so-called debt death spiral. The government will have to spend the entire budget collected from taxes only on paying the interest on the debt. For the army, medicine, roads, and education, money will physically not remain. They will have to print unbacked dollars on an industrial scale simply to pay the interest, which will lead to hyperinflation eating up the population's income in a matter of months. And the process of flight from the dollar has already been launched. Our scenario will only press the gas pedal to the floor. Look closely at the actions of the world's central banks. Over the last 24 months, they have been buying up gold at a frantic speed the world has not seen since the 1960s. China, Turkey, India, Poland, Singapore, they are scooping up physical metal by the ton, emptying vaults in London and Switzerland. Why? Because gold is the only asset that has no counterparty risk. Gold cannot be blocked by the press of a button in Washington. Gold does not need the SWIFT system. Gold does not require trust in the American president or the head of the ECB. It is God's money, as old Swiss bankers like to say. In our scenario, the confiscation of Russian assets will become a signal for the entire global South. The dollar is a weapon. Save yourselves. The world will finally split into two currency blocks. One shrinking block around the dollar and G7 countries, the other expanding block around BRICS, backed by real resources, gold, oil, rare earth metals, and food. In this new reality, the dollar will lose its status as the sole reserve currency. It will become just one of the currencies, and a currency with a heavily tarnished reputation at that. And this means that the USA will lose its exorbitant privilege, the possibility to consume more than they produce, paying with freshly printed papers that the world is forced to accept. The standard of living in America and Europe will fall, as imports will become many times more expensive. The era of cheap goods from Asia, cheap energy, and cheap credit will end the moment the ink on the confiscation decree dries. Let us look at the clock again. In our imaginary command center, the last hours of the ultimatum are ticking away. Tension reaches its peak. Diplomatic telephones are white hot. European leaders are in horror trying to find a way out, understanding that their economy is the first and main victim in this war. 90% of the frozen assets are in their jurisdiction, which means both legal lawsuits and retaliatory measures will hit them. If Russia strikes, it will fall on European banks, on the euro, on European industry, which is already suffering from high energy prices. Washington, however, is in relative safety across the ocean, at least at the first stage. This creates monstrous tension within NATO. Germans, French, and Italians ask a reasonable question. Why must we die economically for the political ambitions of the USA? The risk of political collapse of the Western coalition becomes real. Investors, seeing this chaos and inconsistency, flee into real assets, into land, into raw materials, into food, into gold. Bitcoin and other decentralized assets may soar to the skies as an alternative system of value transfer beyond the control of maddened states. But up its sleeve, Moscow, in this scenario, has another card, a joker, about which economists speak in whispers, fearing to summon trouble: intellectual property. In the text of the hypothetical ultimatum, There is a clause on the suspension of the protection of intellectual property rights for residents of unfriendly countries. Think about the depth and long-term nature of this threat. The modern economy of the USA is not an economy of factories. It is an economy of ideas, patents, licenses, and brands. Apple, Microsoft, Pfizer, Disney, Nike, their trillion-dollar capitalization rests not on machines, but on the rights to intangible assets. What will happen if Russia, a country with a powerful engineering and scientific base, legalizes piracy at the state level? This means that any factory will be able to legally, with government permission, produce generics, copies of the latest drugs for cancer or diabetes without paying a single kopeck for a patent to an American pharmaceutical company. This means the free use of the most complex software, industrial technologies, and entertainment content. And most terrifying for the West, this flow of free or ultra-cheap technologies could flood the markets of third countries. Why would hospitals in Africa, India, or Latin America buy an expensive original drug for $1,000 if there is a legal Russian or Chinese analog for $50? This undermines the very business model of Western capitalism. This is an asymmetrical war of a new type. You steal our past, the accumulated money, we steal your future, the technologies and the rent from them. The damage from such a step can be measured in trillions of dollars of lost profit over decades. We must also speak honestly and without embellishment about moral hazard and the social contract. If a state allows itself to violate the fundamental right of property in relation to another country, this virus of lawlessness will inevitably, like an infection, spread inside the society itself. If you can take the money of Russians for a higher goal, what will prevent you tomorrow from taking the money of pension funds to save the budget? What will prevent the introduction of forced conversion of your foreign currency deposits into state bonds that are worth nothing? Explaining this as a patriotic duty. Once the taboo is broken, the boundaries of what is permitted are erased. History knows many examples. In 1933, Roosevelt confiscated gold from American citizens, forbidding them to own bullion under threat of prison. During crises, governments always strive to reach into the pockets of the population to cover their mistakes. Confiscation of external assets is just the first step, a trial run, testing the reaction. It is a signal to all of us. In an era of turbulence, you own nothing that you cannot protect physically. Your property in the digital world is conditional. It exists only as long as the system considers you a loyal citizen. So, what does this global chess game played in high offices mean for you? A person who simply wants to live, raise children, and have confidence in tomorrow. The consequences will reach every home, every refrigerator, regardless of where you live, in New York, in Berlin, or in a small town. If the world financial system fragments and breaks into blocks, the efficiency of the global economy will drop sharply. This means a rise in costs for everything. Logistics will become more complicated, insurance more expensive, credit less accessible. Inflation will cease to be a temporary bogeyman from the news. It will become a permanent, suffocating tax on your life. Goods to which you are accustomed, from good coffee and chocolate to smartphones and cars, may disappear from the shelves or become luxury items due to the rupture of supply chains. Pension savings invested in reliable state papers may burn in the flame of inflation, leaving a whole generation of elderly people with nothing, forced to choose between food and medicine. This is a scenario where the middle class is destroyed as a class, eroded between a handful of ultra-rich owners of real assets and a huge mass of poor people completely dependent on state benefits. You and I live in a unique, pivotal historical time. We are observing the sunset of a unipolar world and the painful, bloody birth of something new. Most people around us are sleeping. They scroll through a TikTok feed, discuss celebrity gossip, argue about trifles, and believe that tomorrow will be the same as yesterday because it has always been so. But you, having watched this scenario to this point, are already different. You understand the risks. You see the cracks on the facade of a building that seems eternal, but the foundation of which has already been washed away. In 50 years, history textbooks will perhaps call this week that we modeled a point of bifurcation. The moment when the West, in an attempt to punish an enemy, shot itself in the foot and destroyed its hegemony with its own hands. The confiscation of $300 billion could become the most expensive mistake in the history of finance, a mistake that cost an empire its throne. We have front row tickets to this grandiose and terrifying spectacle, but unfortunately, we are not just spectators, we are participants in the crowd. Our savings, our jobs, our plans for the future are put on the line while kings move pawns without caring about their fate. The time in our simulation has almost run out. The last grains of sand are falling in the clock of the ultimatum, and each of them sounds like the strike of a gong. The world has frozen in anticipation. Washington stands its ground, driven by pride, inertia, and the fear of losing face. Moscow is ready to flip the chessboard if the rules of the game no longer apply and the judges are bribed. Pain will come. It may manifest not tomorrow, but in a month or a year. But the laws of economics cannot be cheated, just as gravity cannot be cheated. For every action, there is a price. For the destruction of trust, the price is chaos. So when you next hear upbeat reports in the news about asset confiscation and the victory of democracy, do not switch the channel. Do not brush it off. Listen to this noise, because in this noise, the fate of your money, the fate of your home, and the fate of your children is being decided. Ask yourself an honest, tough question. If the system collapses, what will I have left? Do I have a plan B? Do I own something real that can be touched with hands? Or do I only have the digital promises of bankrupt states? The answers to these questions may determine who emerges from the coming storm as a winner, having preserved their own, and who will be washed away by the merciless wave of history. The ultimatum in our scenario is real. The stakes are higher than life, and the clock continues to tick, counting down the seconds to the moment of truth.